Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, welcome. Episode 14 of the Near Memo with Mike, David, and me, Greg Sterling, here to talk about social search and commerce and what we think is interesting that happened in the past week. Say hi.
Hi.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening again.
Exactly. We very much appreciate you listening to us in our sometimes coherent, sometimes exasperated musings. The item that I wanted to talk about, even though I've been talking about this for seemingly weeks and weeks and weeks, but the thing that has the most, as I said, gravitational force for me is the iOS 14.5 opt-in tracking, app tracking transparency numbers. Is that a siren in the background somewhere?
It's a hot story, Greg.
Yeah, that's our hot story alert. Urban sounds with a Z. All right. So Flurry Analytics, which is part of Verizon Media, formerly part of Yahoo. I don't know how they've organized it internally, but they track a lot of apps. They've got a lot of data on a lot of apps, over 1 million apps across 2 billion devices. They said. And what they've determined is that the global opt-in rate so far, 2 weeks in or 11 or 12 days in, is 12%. So that, in other words, 12% of users seeing those pop-ups are allowing tracking. And that means that 88% are not. But in the US, the numbers are even more significant because it's only 4% that are opting in. So this represents a kind of doomsday scenario for a lot of these developers and publishers. I mean, there was a survey done by Harris on behalf of Ad Age that suggested, this was done in the last week or two, suggested as many as 47% of people would allow brands to track them, meaning Facebook and others. And this is just, that's attitudinal, and this is actual behavior, what's really going on. And this is far more significant because what it indicates to me is that consumers really understand what's going on here, and they're speaking very loudly with their behavior, saying, we do not want to be tracked. We like having this control. We understand what this is, and we're saying no to being tracked. And so I think it's quite profound, and we'll see what happens over the coming weeks and whether these numbers stay flat or go up a little bit. But best case scenario, I was thinking it was going to be like, 60% we're not going to allow it, or 70% we're not going to allow it. But now it's like 90+% saying no. That's a pretty serious.
It sends a strong message to our government that we need better privacy protections. But the question I would have, though, internationally, Apple is 17 or 20% market share. So 12%
Right.
of that is not a huge number. In the United States, it's a much bigger impact because they have 50% market share. So clearly, 90% of 50% is a much bigger number, 40% or whatever it turns out to be. It's quite a bit bigger number. So it's primarily an impact in the United States at this point, where privacy rules are much more rodeo, Wild West-like.
I also think it's interesting, Mike, you brought up, it's a signal to the government to give us better privacy regulations. I also think it's potentially a signal to antitrust regulators, particularly as it relates to Facebook and Google, and to some extent Amazon, around, hey, 96% of people think these companies are doing bad things and have too much power. I think that there's probably some of that as a reaction to just big tech generally. And I think that it certainly is it could be a death blow for a lot of publishers, as you said, Greg, who are now going to have a harder time monetizing their.
Well, they're going to go to subscriptions, is what
right,
they're going to do,
which you also highlighed this week in a recent week or a recent semi-daily newsletter. But I just think it's indicative of. I was surprised actually that the number was so substantial, and you can't get 96% of Americans to agree on anything, or even 45% of Americans, Mike, if we're looking at the segment of iPhone users overall. So I think it's a pretty stark finding, and I'm glad that you highlighted it, and I'm glad that you've been banging this drum for as long and as loudly as you have.
And it still leaves unsaid, though, other than the Apple nutrition label, what they really know about us and how much they're tracking. I mean, the equally disquieting thing to me is that, and we had read an article or saw an article this week of that company that ran the ads on Facebook showing people what
Signal.
what Facebook knew about them. And it's just a terribly disquieting amount of information within the first party.
Well, and that's all first party.
Right? We have
stuff.
no insight to that at all. And I think that's the death knell, or ultimately will be Facebook and Google's to a lesser extent.
Well, I mean, what's also significant about this, something we've talked about before, is the ease of the user friendliness, the usability of this pop-up, right? It's very clear what this is about. People only have to hit a single button to express their preference, and then it's done, at least in theory. Whereas in a lot of these other privacy frameworks, GDPR, CCPA, individual companies, you've got to jump through so many hoops, and it's really confusing and difficult. I was canceling my Amazon Web Services account today, and it was just impossibly difficult to do that. It took me 20 minutes to figure it out, and then it wasn't simple. This is really simple, and people are responding to it accordingly. They understand what this is, and they're doing it because it's made easy. So that's a message to the government, is that you have to compel these companies to make it easier to express your privacy preferences and control your data. That's been one of the sticking points and one of the friction points in this whole discussion. Nobody does CCPA, nobody does GDPR really, unless the companies make it super easy to do that, because you just have to go in and click a bunch of buttons, read things, and it's just too much effort. And then the companies themselves sort of treat that like, well, consumers don't really care that much because they're not expressing their preferences. They're leaving it untouched. But this is this stands in stark contrast to that.
Amen to that. Preach, brother.
Okay. All right. So I think, Mike, you were up next,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken.
The piece that struck me this week was the interview at The Verge with Harley Finkelstein, now of Shopify. He's the president of Shopify. Now, I don't know. Finkelstein sounds like a Jewish name, and Harley sounds like not a Jewish name, so I have no idea. But I find it
you're living in America. This is America. Okay. Anything is possible.
I just thought Harley Finkelstein. This is like, a little bit, it sort of grates on the ears, Anyways, I just thought
you would be happier with Moshe Finkelstein.
I would think it more consistent. That's all.
All right.
David's shaking his head at my Jewish jokes. It was a fascinating interview because Shopify has clearly positioned itself on the side of the small business as the crucial service that small businesses need at the center of their business. They understand that. They aggregate businesses as opposed to Facebook or Google sort of circumventing the ad world by aggregating customers and thus gaining control of that customer. And Shopify understands that the critical thing for all these businesses is to retain that relationship with their customer. And I just thought they positioned themselves very clearly in that spot where they know who their customer is. They're going to help those small businesses do better, run better businesses, retain better relationship with their clients, and do so while leveraging the size of their network, which I think you said, Greg, that in aggregate, they're the second largest e-commerce entity now.
That's their claim.
Well, and I believe it, but they're going to leverage that for the benefit of the people in that network by providing cheaper capital and other joint services. And I thought, this is a company that I can look up to and respect, and I really enjoyed the interview. So, thoughts?
I totally agree. I think Shopify has built not only a great business, but a great platform. And it's one of the few examples, I think, of someone or a company that is doing well by doing good by its customers. So I think it does stand in stark contrast to not necessarily their competitors. I think there are a number of players, as we've highlighted in recent podcasts, that are also building great products that really help small businesses. But I think that they've really Shopify has done a great job, in particular, I think, at targeting the business who already. I don't think it's quite as good for nascent businesses that are just getting started. It's a little bit complex to still figure things out. But for a business that needs to go from 10 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour, I think that they offer a lot of really compelling features by default, as you were saying, Mike, that help them stay in touch with their customers. Their app store is fairly easy to integrate specific features that you're looking for that they may not offer natively. So I think they've done a great job of identifying exactly who their target customer is and building things that are genuinely useful to them.
And that scales from pretty small businesses to very big ones. I thought the scale of was interesting as well.
For sure. And I think that there's they've, at least from what I've seen on the outside, it seems like they're putting more energy into the sort of I think they call it like Shopify Pro or something like that, the sort of more enterprise tier plan. I think that they've enabled a lot of businesses to grow to such a level where they need more advanced e-commerce features, and Shopify, their product team or their executive team or whoever, understands that we probably shouldn't try to put all of those in the sort of base level product.
One quick comment. I mean, I agree with what you guys are saying. One quick comment. Some of the surveys I looked at this week. One of the pieces today is really about sort of the post-COVID shopper and how they may be different from pre-COVID shopping, and they're more decisive yet sort of impulsive and willing to experiment on new brands. There's another survey that's sort of, I'm wrapping into that talks about people's impatience and frustration with bad online experiences. And one of the things we discussed in a previous podcast was how everything that's happened over the last year requires, and the dependence upon online as a kind of an initial exposure point to the brand and experience, how websites are going to have to upgrade. The whole user experience is going to have to upgrade. And I think that's one of the things that Shopify is helping these small businesses do, is create better online experiences for their customers, which emerges as a more and more important thing.
For sure. Their default theme for a business that's just getting started on Shopify is quite good. It's responsive. The images, all resize appropriately. The checkout experience on Shopify is phenomenal, as is Square's and others, which has never been the case with e-commerce platforms pre, right, Shopify 2012. Everyone had just terrible checkout experiences, and I think that that in and of itself, even if the back end of Shopify were impossible to use, which it's not, but presenting customers with an easy checkout experience has probably tripled or quadrupled conversion rates for small businesses in a lot of cases.
Right, undoubtedly, and that's a huge part of the whole sort of friction problem for in many cases. All right, so in our remaining time, David, I think the floor is yours to talk about.
Sure, I was going to talk about the new NextDoor knockoff, which is Facebook's Neighborhoods feature. They announced this week something that's been, Greg, you pointed out, this has sort of been rumored, or it's been in the works.
It's been in Canada.
It's been in Canada for quite a while. It's interesting, NextDoor, I think, is hoping to go public later this year. I've seen some articles to suggest that. Clearly, Facebook is trying to sort of get ahead of that public offering. I think that you guys, or at least you, Greg, are maybe a little more bullish on the potential success of Neighborhoods. I have been a longtime Nextdoor user. I actually canceled my account this week. I just found myself getting very. It's for me, it's been the law of diminishing returns. The posts all feel repetitive. I actually don't have close personal friendships with anyone on the Nextdoor platform. And maybe that's Facebook's differentiator, is that, I do have friends on Facebook, even though I'm not very active, and that there's some sort of connection there where I'm, they're doing a better job at serving relevant posts to me. But frankly, I find the posts on Nextdoor, fairly low quality, not particularly engaging, and frequently about many of the same topics over and over again, which unfortunately, and Greg, we talked about this offline. Catalytic converter thefts are rampant.
Crime.
Coyotes in our neighborhood are a daily occurrence. So it just, to me, it seems like the content is fairly low value. So I'm less convinced that this is really going to move the needle for Facebook in terms of engagement. And I also think that they're going to have a hard time moderating, which is one of the things they do very poorly. Typically, they are loath to get involved in moderating posts. In fact, they outsource the decision of whether to moderate the former guy off of their platform. And so I wonder how many decisions around moderation they will be able to offload onto some third party body when it comes to neighborhoods, which is one thing that is a very controversial topic on Nextdoor. People irate that their posts are getting censored, all of those kinds of things. So I think that it has the potential to blow back in a very negative way for Facebook, and with very little upside from what I can see.
Well, so you're saying a couple of different things. I mean, you're critiquing Nextdoor, and then you're sort of,
and I think
by
Facebook's
analogy
going to do an
saying
even worse job of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I think the origin of Nextdoor was really around crime and neighborhood safety, and that culture has never really been fully expunged or changed or evolved. I mean, it's still the core of a lot of the user experience there. Facebook has an opportunity for that not to be the case. What I find, I am it's like disappointing to see the clone process happening again and again. Sort of with Facebook, they started Reels in response to TikTok, and there are a bunch of these examples. What I think is interesting from my point of view about neighborhoods is that Facebook has never really had a good local consumer experience, despite this being something that seems natural and logical for them. I mean, they've taken a couple of runs at it, but they've never committed and they've never developed anything particularly useful. And I think this has the opportunity to be that. But I think you're right that they could get caught up in the trap of cloning Nextdoor and then replicate all of Nextdoor's problems. But as a local referral tool, as a recommendations tool, I think it has some potential. And that to me is what was most interesting about Nextdoor was the business referrals. Hey, can somebody recommend a painter or landscape
Isn't that
architect
happening in Facebook groups now? Regional Facebook?
I'm sure it is. I'm not in any Facebook groups at this point, but I'm sure it is. And it does happen on Facebook in the news feed as well. But I think that's Facebook ironically is like the number one or number two small business marketing platform. And yet it doesn't have a consumer facing kind of dedicated local experience, which is weird. And I think this has the opportunity to become that if they do it well. I'm not confident that they will, but at least the opportunity is there. Mike,
no, I mean, I
there?
am not a big Facebook user. To me, my social network is my iMessage network. Those people that I group iMessage with, I have a couple of business associates, a couple of friends, a couple of families. Sometimes they overlap. That's my social networking. And I'm very happy there because it's all people I trust and love and I know won't give me any won't give me bullshit back. So I'm very rarely on Facebook. I'm on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn because they're one to many because I publish things and I want people to read them. I'm happy with one to many, but the idea of a peer-to-peer thing on Facebook is just so unappealing to me. I can't really speak to it.
And frankly, I wonder how effective, I'm more likely to trust a recommendation from a friend. That's for sure. I'm not so sure that I would trust a recommendation from a neighbor, right? Like, so-and-so did, loved their gutter cleaner. Okay. Like, how big is your house? Like, what, when did you have this?
Well,
I still have all the same questions that I would have if I just read that person's review on Google or Yelp or wherever. So.
Yeah, but at least with that, right? So there are multiple sources for local service business recommendations, and at least with something like a kind of a real time word of mouth, quasi word of mouth thing, somebody's had some experience, and you can put them onto the short list hypothetically. I mean, just now we talked about the Wirecutter. There was a Wirecutter item, about how they're expanding, but we've talked about the sort of utility of the Wirecutter because they give you, it's an editorial decision. They give you three choices. It short circuits all the out, it casts the wide net, and then, all of the stuff that you have to do. And I think there's a version of that going on with these local referrals is that you can get a few trusted recommendations and then you do your own due diligence on them. But just for me to go out to Yelp and then to Google and then to this one and to that one and look for somebody to build a fence. I mean, I've had some nightmare experiences just trying to get some simple fence on the side of my house built. It's just, I could talk at length about it. And it's, with all the reviews and all the listings, and it's
Right, but
just,
I guess my point is Facebook
too
already has
much.
the potential to ask your friends for a referral, right? And those
Right,
referrals
but
will be far more valuable, far more useful in terms of cutting the list to 3 than referrals from
that's
neighbors.
very true. But I mean, I suppose if you're always on Facebook and always paying attention, and I'm not, that works. I mean, I guess that could work pretty well, but it's, I guess I
think your
am,
critique of Facebook has done a very poor job of building a real sort of local
yes, that's
business
my,
recommendations product. Entirely valid. I don't think that neighborhoods is going to be the silver bullet for that
well,
problem.
yeah, I guess this is wishful thinking. It's like for years and years and years, I used to talk to Facebook and I would say, why haven't you guys done this or that or the other? And it was just mystifying. And they sort of took a run at it when they turned their events thing into Facebook Local, but they never really developed that. I mean, it's a logical thing, and they've never done it. And I guess there's some part of me that still has some fantasy that they will, although I'm much less enamored of the company than I was years ago today. So you're probably right that they're going to blow this, but I mean, at least it has some potential there. All right.
And on that happy note,
Anyway.
it seems like every episode ends on a down note for us. So we need to figure out how to.
Well, what can we say that's positive?
This week was the first
Mike's story
time.
about Shopify was positive. We should have ended.
Well,
on that.
and I was going to add a personal story. This week was my wife's birthday, and it was the first time that our family has eaten unmasked, the 6 of us together in a room in almost over a year, obviously, and it was a wondrous experience. So there's a happy note
That's
for
great.
you all, and something you can look forward to.
That is great
in your
news.
lives.
That is
Well,
great news. And my
so
wife and I got our
that's-
second Pfizer shots on Monday, so we will be close behind you in about 10 more days.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and I had mine 2 weeks ago, so I'm fully vaccinated. But that is great, and it's a reminder that we need to appreciate these very simple things. It's a kind of a psycho-spiritual cliche, but as we sort of emerge from this period, there's an opening to really appreciate ordinary things in life. And
nothing better than a hug. The one thing about this, I have generally been pretty happy in COVID. I don't mind being in my little office by myself, with the exception of missing hugs, and I got a lot of them.
That's great.
You should have a T-shirt. Nothing better than a hug.
It's absolutely the truth.
Okay, nothing better than the Hug Foundation. There you go. All right, we will see you next time. Thanks again for
everyone.
listening.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.